The church was fuller than it had ever been. Not on Christmas, not on Easter, but on a random Thursday night, 3 days after millions vanished. People who had never stepped inside a church were now sitting in the pews. Some were crying. Some were angry. Some just looked numb. At the front stood Pastor Elijah Grant. 3 days ago, half of his congregation disappeared, including his wife. He adjusted the microphone. His hands trembled slightly, but his voice stayed steady. "I know why you're here," he began quietly. "You're not here for religion. You're here for answers." A woman in the third row stood up suddenly. "Why only some?" she shouted. "Why were they taken and not us?" The room filled with murmurs. That was the question everyone was afraid to say out loud. Why only some were taken? Pastor Elijah nodded slowly. He didn't rush his response. "For years," he said, "we thought belief was about words, about labels, about saying the right prayer once and moving on with life. But faith was never meant to be a checkbox. It was meant to be a relationship." Silence fell across the room. "The rapture," he continued, "wasn't about church attendance. It wasn't about social status. It wasn't about who looked holy on the outside. It was about the condition of the heart." A man near the back shook his head. "So you're saying we weren't good enough?" The pastor stepped down from the stage and walked into the aisle. "No," he said gently. "This was never about being good enough. None of us are. It was about surrender. About truly knowing Him, not just knowing about Him." He paused. "Some people treated faith like insurance. Something to keep in a drawer for emergencies. Others lived it daily. Quietly. Sincerely. Imperfect but committed." The weight of his words settled heavily. Screens around the world were still replaying footage of empty cars, abandoned planes, hospital beds without patients. Governments were calling it a global anomaly. But inside that church, people knew. This was the rapture. A teenage girl raised her hand, tears streaming down her face. "Is it too late?" That question felt heavier than the first. Pastor Elijah took a deep breath. "What happened was real," he said. "But so is mercy. The story isn't over yet. This is not the end of God's reach. It's the beginning of accountability." He looked around at the packed room. For years, warnings sounded dramatic, over-spiritual, easy to ignore. But the truth is, we were distracted, busy chasing comfort, success, validation. We assumed there would always be more time. His voice cracked slightly. "I assumed that too." The audience realized something in that moment. Even the pastor hadn't been untouched by regret. He had preached readiness, but never imagined the day would actually come in his lifetime. "Why only some were taken?" he repeated softly. "Because faith was never about appearance. It was about authenticity." Outside, sirens echoed in the distance. The world was still in chaos. News anchors debated theories. Scientists searched for explanations. But inside that church, something deeper was happening. Conviction. Not fear-driven panic, but awakening. Pastor Elijah returned to the stage. "If you're here tonight," he said, "it means you still have breath in your lungs. And as long as you have breath, you have a choice." The room was completely silent now. "This is the final wake-up call. Not to scare you, not to shame you, but to remind you that eternity is real, and it demands a decision." He stepped back from the microphone. No music played. No dramatic lights dimmed. Just stillness. And for the first time, the people sitting there understood. The rapture wasn't random. It was revealing. And the question was no longer why only some were taken. The question now was what they would do, now that they were still here.